Welcome to the Marketing Made Great podcast. In each episode, we'll be sharing with you the tips, tricks, and techniques from the top sales and marketing experts from around the globe that will make marketing simple for your business. Here's your host, Mark Traeger.
Ladies and gentlemen, I'm very honored this week to have Jay Cornelius with Nine Labs here on this week's episode of the Marketing Made Great podcast. Now, Jay, I did a little research on you and discovered that you went to the Wharton School of Business. That's kind of unusual. What possessed you to go there?
Well, a little kind of asterisk around that. Wharton's got some online programs, and to go way back in my history, I actually dropped out of high school and never went to college.
Oh, wow.
First business my sophomore year of high school, and never really went back. And I found out that as my career progressed, I'm now 30 years into doing this, that there were some gaps in my knowledge. So I went back and did some business school online stuff, and Wharton is one of the best business schools in the country. So I figured, why not go there?
Oh, wow. Fantastic. Wow. I didn't know that about you. That's quite interesting. And of course, it probably gave you a lot of perspective on a lot of different things.
Yeah, it's interesting. When you go back to B school after doing things for so long, it fills in gaps. There's a lot of things you're like, oh, okay, that's why that works that way. There's actually been a formula for this the whole time. I just didn't know it because I was a dumbass and dropped out of school. So it actually fills in a lot of things, and it gives me some tools, and anybody else who goes to B school, it gives you some tools to be able to communicate effectively to other people who have been through that training.
Yeah, no, absolutely. It makes sense. So, I've noticed that looking at your career over the years, you've worked for, various companies and in various different roles. And then 6 years ago, you started Nine Labs. Like I said, I've been watching you for years, and I noticed that you've always had a very unique perspective on things that seems to be driving brands today. And I think most people get confused about the difference between a brand and a logo, and I'm sure it's so much more. What's your perspective on that?
A lot of people, when they think about a brand, they take Nike, for example. Nike has the iconic swoosh and the "Just Do It" tagline. They think that's what a brand is. And a brand is not that at all. That's just the mental bookmark for a brand. That's just the visual kind of representation to remind you that is the brand, to say that, oh, that thing came from that company. But what a brand really is the intersection of what a company does and how people feel about it. A great example, going back to Nike, is the whole Colin Kaepernick thing. It's a very divisive issue. Some people are adamantly supporting him. Some people are adamantly against the whole idea of him taking a knee. And Nike decided to double down on that and say, well, we believe in what Kaepernick is doing. And so we are going to amplify that. And what you saw was really interesting in the reaction of people who were taking their shoes and burning them.
Right.
So the Nike brand in their mind was very different than it was just the day before. The day before they loved those shoes, and now they hate those shoes. And so the brand has a lot more to do than the swoosh. Like, they didn't care about the swoosh. They cared about what that brand represented.
Right.
And so people, when they're thinking about branding, need to understand that brands are much more than the product. They're this kind of ephemeral feeling that people have about the product. And there's only a part of that you can control and influence. And a lot of it is driven by what your product does in the market and how people feel about it.
Yeah, no doubt. And when you're building a brand from scratch, or even re-energizing even an existing brand, it can be a challenge. What sort of kind of fundamental or foundational things should companies be focusing on and paying attention to as they look to develop and define that brand?
Regardless of whether a company's been around for a while and has an established place in the market, or if they're just starting out, one of the foundational things that they need to think about is their brand ethos or their brand personality.
Hmm.
If your brand walked into a room, if it was a person and it walked into the room, what would they be like? Are they well dressed? Are they casual? Are they tall? Are they fast? Do they talk fast? Define that person for me. Like, who is that person? Are they very articulate, or do they use more slang? Are they sports fans? How do they dress? How do they carry themselves? What types of things are they into? What do they stand for? To some point, what are their politics? How do their personality of that brand manifest itself? And then what you have to think about is the brand personality that you've just created. Is that the brand? Like, could that person go and enjoy having a cup of coffee with your customer? Or would your customer enjoy going out for a beer with that person? And then you need to think about what that relationship is like between the brand persona or the brand ethos and the customers you're trying to serve, and make sure that that's a good relationship. Make sure that that's something that both sides can benefit from.
Well, and having that brand personality, like you say, that ethos, doesn't it make putting together the marketing strategy for the company a whole lot easier to put together and understand?
It really does, because going back to how the person carries themselves and whether or not they're articulate or they use a lot of slang, that manifests itself in your marketing copy. So if they're kind of a hip, using the common terms of pop culture, well, then that needs to manifest itself in the marketing. If they're more austere and more reserved, then the marketing copy is going to reflect that. But without defining that up front, you can have wildly variant messages, and that's not going to connect with your target audience.
Right. Yeah. I mean, one of the things that I've seen, and most people don't realize, that there's a big difference between Bass Pro Shops and Cabela's.
Right.
Bass Pro is more fishing oriented, and Cabela's is more hunting oriented, and it's a projection in their stores, their marketing, and everything.
Yeah. And then REI is in the same vein, but still a
Right.
very different vibe.
Right. Exactly. So, with that in mind, do you think there's anything unique or different when it comes to B2B branding and marketing versus B2C doing the same, or how so?
I think ultimately it's very, very similar, but B2B adds another layer. So ultimately, when you're in a B2B sale, you're still connecting to a human being. There's a human being on the other side of that transaction who's helping to make that decision. And in B2B, there's generally multiple human beings that are participating in some way. Fundamentally, any transaction comes down to connecting to two people. It comes down to the needs buyer who needs this thing, and the economic buyer who's actually going to pay for it. And in a B2C transaction, those are often the same person. If you need a pair of running shoes, you're the person with the need and you're the person with the credit card. So you're the one person who's going to make that decision. But in some cases, B2C does involve two people. Think about a couple where one person might want something, but the other person is in charge of the checkbook. So there's two people that have to be convinced there. In a B2B transaction, that typically is a little bit more complicated, because those people might be in different departments. They might have different levels of authority. Sure. So you have to think about how to connect with both the needs buyer and the economic buyer in all of those transactions. It's just in a B2B, it just gets more complicated.
Yeah, definitely. Again, too, I think in today's attention-driven economy, most companies, as Gary Vaynerchuk says, we're day trading in attention. Every day we got to draw attention. Does that ethos or the brand personality plays an even more important role in drawing that attention, doesn't it?
It does. People are drawn to things that they enjoy. And something that we talk with a lot of our clients about is understanding the fundamentals of human decision-making and the psychology behind that, and
Sure.
how oftentimes it's not necessarily driven by the higher order thinking or the high functioning psychology. It's often just driven by the lizard brain, good old basic stuff. Every decision that a human makes comes down to a choice first between desire and fear. Is this something I want, or is this something that I should be afraid of? In the case of food, should I eat it, or is it poisonous? In the case of products, do I want it, or is the value not there? And those that decision gets more complex the more nuanced the types of products there are. But fundamentally, if you can get past that initial fear trigger and create a desire, you've passed the lizard brain and you can go up to the high functioning brain for better decision making.
Yeah, and I think too, at least from what I see, it's not necessarily that people buy the best product. I think it's what they buy is the product that they understand the fastest or quickest.
Yeah, that's certainly a piece of it. There's another kind of psychological construct that's really helpful called exchange theory. And it's essentially that if someone's perceived value that they will receive from a transaction is greater than the perceived cost, they will do it. If the perceived value is lower than the perceived cost, they won't. Now, there's a number of ways to measure value and cost. Like that could be dollars, that could be time, it could be any number of things. So you have to think about, in the mind of the person who is making the decision, how are they creating value? What is their measurement of value? And what is their measurement of cost? If it's purely financial, then they're shopping on price. If it's emotional, then you've got to figure out what emotion is driving that.
Yeah, but isn't it true though that most people buy emotionally first and logically later?
That's certainly a factor. That kind of gets nuanced depending on the person. Some people are a little bit more emotionally driven just in general. Some people are a little bit more analytical just in general. That kind of is that, are you a left brain or a right brain person? Are you more of an early adopter? Like, are you shopping because you want to be cool with your friends, or are you shopping because you're trying to save for retirement?
Right. No, I understand that. So taking all of that into play, with the rise of things like Amazon and Walmart and all these other different online mediums that we can buy it now, is there a need for branding or even sales and marketing? Is it even necessary anymore?
I think it's more necessary than ever, because what has happened because of the internet, and I think Amazon's probably been the company who's taken the most advantage of this, is we've shifted from a seller-driven economy to a buyer-driven economy, because people now have access to that long tail of products. So if you need a very specific type of screw for a project you're working on, you can find it online now. Before, you would have to go to some specialty retailer, maybe they didn't have it in your city, and it was a lot of work. You can find some really obscure book or really obscure art. Anything that you're looking for, you can typically find it online now, and that's the stuff that exists in the long tail. It used to be that a company could just create a product and market it with enough money and with enough power, and people would end up saying, okay, well, yeah, I guess that's pretty good, I'll get some. Now people have much more choice and much more ability to customize the products that they buy. So the brand is actually much more important now than it used to be, because people are seeking something that relates to them directly.
No, I agree. And one of the things I've discovered even from my own shopping on Amazon, I go in looking for a specific brand, and there's this thing called data science that puts that recommended other options in front of me.
Right.
And all of a sudden I see a brand I've never even heard of, but because of the photography, description, and everything, it looks like it's actually better to solve my problem.
Exactly, because it's been more tailored for your specific needs and your specific desires. So there's recently been an emergence of what are called digitally native vertical brands, which are brands that are specifically engineered for a specific type of person. So an example, there's a company I think they're based in New York, that is targeting high net worth women between a certain age who do yoga and are not employed because they just have a certain amount of means, right? So they've got enough money, they don't have to work, and yoga is their thing.
Right.
And they're selling yoga pants that start at $300 and go up to like $1,000 for a pair of yoga pants. This is not something that you could mass market, but because they've identified a group of people that's large enough that has the means and wants to solve a very specific problem, meaning that they want very custom tailored and unique and comfortable and high quality yoga pants, that they can now sell a product way above whatever the market average is, because they've identified that one tiny vein of customers that will pay for it.
Yeah, and I think too the Google gives us the opportunity to collect a lot of data that we could never get before, and with all of this information that's there about our customers now, what are some of the things that you're seeing as some of the rising trends when it comes to marketing?
Well, I think that digitally native vertical brand is one that's very interesting right now, because what they've proven, and there's a number of these companies, what they've proven is that with enough good research on what a market actually wants and understanding the size of that market and the buying power of that market enough, you could just go and create a product to solve that problem.
Right.
It's a shift from, hey, I have a product idea, I'm going to go find customers, to, hey, I'm going to go find a group of customers that has a need and then create a product to solve it.
Yeah, I think, from the conversations that you and I have had, the more you deep dive into the ideal customer profile for yourself, the more it reveals. I kind of liken it to creating a CIA dossier file. Yep. So that you can really understand the behavior and what motivates them and drives them to making a buying decision.
Yeah, exactly. And that's where a lot of the fundamental research that we advise companies on is doing that basic problem validation. If you see a problem in the market, can you validate that there are enough other people out in that market that have that problem and are willing to pay for a solution? If you can do that, then you move to the next step. This is all stuff that that's coming out. I don't know if I told you, I'm writing a book on this. That's coming out in
a book. Oh, awesome.
That fundamental step of understanding if a market exists for this idea, that is something that a lot of companies don't do. And
right.
That's something, going back to the DNVBs, as they're called, the digitally native vertical brands, that's something that they start with first. They don't have a product idea first.
Sure.
They try to identify a market first.
Well, it sounds like we're going to have you back to talk about your book as well.
I'm happy to do that when it comes out.
Yeah, no problem. So here's something that I always get when I talk to clients as well. It is, with so many options when it comes to social media, how can my brand market itself effectively with all the options that are out there in the social media world?
It's about finding your tribe. Some people are Facebook people. Some people are Snapchat people. Some people are easier reached on LinkedIn. It really depends on that personality profile. So understanding where that person goes, we call them watering holes. Where are the watering holes where your tribe hangs out?
Mm-hmm.
To liken that to the physical world, like what bars and restaurants and shops and stuff do they go to? Like what part of town do they live in? So think about it geographically on the internet. Like what neighborhood are these people hanging out in? Are they in the Facebook neighborhood, or are they in the Snapchat neighborhood? Are they in some other neighborhood?
Right.
Identify what that is. Maybe they're on some forum, on some website that you only found out about yesterday, and there's a giant group of people having conversations about the very thing you're trying to do embedded in this forum.
Right.
Maybe it's a subreddit. You just got to figure that out and see where to go.
No, and I agree. And that brings, I guess, the next question too. You hear, people opine and talk about content. Mm-hmm. How do companies build effective content to, draw attention to them or get them to be regarded as a subject matter expert or stuff like that?
I tend to take a slightly different perspective on that. If
Okay.
you're generating content because you want to become a subject matter expert, that's kind of the wrong motivation. As a company or as someone who is specifically focused on marketing, I think a lot of people do that. Really, I think it's about finding questions you know how to answer. And so going into forums or using a website like Quora or just digging around in social networks and finding questions that people ask that you know the answer to, and then just publish the answer to that. I think that's a better way to be more helpful. I think if you go into this by genuinely trying to help the people that you're serving, whatever market or community is that you're trying to be in, if you generally just try to answer those questions honestly and be helpful for them, that's going to build a lot of good content. And
Yeah.
if you, for me personally, if I go out and say, oh, I'm going to write an article about X today, it's never as good as when I'm genuinely trying to answer somebody's question.
Very good advice. I like that approach. With dealing with companies and clients and all kinds of things, results or return on an investment are always something that they're looking for. So when you put together marketing campaigns and things like that, how do you know it's working? Is it by the awards you get, the headline in the trades? What is it that makes you know it's working?
So minor asterisk there. Like, we don't do a lot of marketing activation. We don't do a lot of kind of the tactical day-to-day stuff. I can talk about it at a high level, but that's not where my focus is.
Okay.
So that being said, you want to figure out what KPI you're trying to move. Like, which needle are you trying to move, and how much movement is successful? Like, how do you define success? Are you just trying to get people to your page? Like, just trying to build brand awareness and, hey, listen, I got 1,000 people to my page every day. That's success. Okay. Well, then that's easy to measure. If you're trying to measure something more complex, like people like to use this word engagement, but nobody really knows what it means. If you're trying to measure something like people moving through a sales funnel, you can do that. So I think it's a matter of figuring out what you want to change, how much you want to change it, and then just iterate like mad until you see some movement in that direction.
That makes sense. That's good. So, you and I and a lot of other people are out there constantly looking at what is going on. So what do you think is the future of marketing and advertising as you see it?
More personification, more the kind of the $5 word is customer heterogeneity. It's more specifics to the type of person, or even down to the individual level. We're starting to see a lot more intelligent advertising in terms of you're on Instagram and you get an ad for a product that you looked at on your desktop computer. Or you're browsing some things on some website, and then you get an ad for a very similar but maybe a more suitable product. People are getting smarter about understanding both the buying power, the purchasing decision style, and the actual needs of customers. So I think there's going to be a lot more personalization, and it's going to get smarter in terms of how accurately it can place a product in front of someone at the right time. The caution that we have to have there is it could easily get really creepy, and it could easily overstep some bounds in terms of privacy. People want to browse the web, and they want to browse the web freely and look for products and services that are interesting to them, but they don't want to feel manipulated. So that's a very fine line that marketers are going to have to pay attention to, is make sure that you're doing things in a way that, sure, put your product in the right place. That's fine. But don't do it in a way that feels creepy. So if I'm in my house and I'm watching a movie and I'm talking with my wife about something, and my Alexa bot tends to, overhears me, and then I get an ad for that product on Amazon the next day, that's a little creepy.
Okay. So I'm going to try something on you, and it's going to be 3 quick questions, or what I call kind of the lightning round. They're real simple. What is your favorite commercial or marketing campaign of all time that you've seen over the years?
Favorite campaign of all time? Wow, that's going to take some thought.
Okay, well,
I kind of, it might sound cliche, but I kind of go back to the 1984 ad from Apple. I know it's a way back, but it was something that was it was so different than the advertising you were seeing at the time, and it really set the tone for what Apple would become. I think in general, Apple does a good job by talking about benefits and not about features. That's a contrast that we use all the time with clients is, when you watch an iPhone ad, it's talking about the benefits you get from using the device, as opposed to an Android ad is talking about megabits and pixels and yada yada, feature stuff.
Sure.
I also tend to like, this is kind of personal, but I tend to like things that are that are a little bit more risky. Like I think the Reese's peanut butter cups ads are interesting because they're just kind of straight to the point, and it's like, yeah, this isn't good for you, but you're going to do it anyway because it's delicious.
Exactly.
Right.
Very good. Yeah. Sure.
I like what Wendy's is doing on social media. I think that they're just not taking themselves too seriously.
Right.
I like it when a brand can be more personal and they can expose a little bit of hey, yeah, we're trying to sell you hamburgers here. We all know that that's the game, but let's have some fun.
Yeah, definitely. So, what's the worst campaign or marketing commercial you've seen?
Oh, man,
there's so many, right?
There's so many. The worst stuff is really there's so many like local ads, and there's stuff that's just tone deaf to what's going on in society and in pop culture.
Sure.
There's so many good examples that I hesitate to like pull one out.
No, I understand.
Anything that's just completely tone deaf to what's going on in the world.
Yeah.
And there's poorly timed things, but there's other things that are just like really that you are completely not paying attention to the way people are thinking right now.
Exactly. So here's that third final question. Do you believe that TV is dead or on its way out?
No, not at all.
Oh, really? Why so?
Well, so it's still a very effective medium to get a message out. And there's no replacement for TV. Now, I guess it depends on how you define TV, but there's still no replacement for TV for live sports or live events. That's never going to change. You're always going to want to watch something live. TV, in terms of the paradigm of you've got a box on your, somewhere in your house that gets channels, that's probably fading. Like we see that shifting already. But there's still going to be, think about channels and media companies, going back to the original part of the conversation is brands. Like, if you go to Fox, you're going to get a certain style of content. If you're going to FX, you're going to get a slightly different style of content.
Right.
So that's not going to change. And I think as long as the media companies and the brands that they're publishing content under adhere to that ethos, kind of bring things full circle, I think that's not going to go away at all. The medium in which it's delivered, whether it's streaming or through a cable provider or satellite or whatever, that's going to change with technology. But the core value proposition of delivering media content is not going to change. Okay.
All right. Cool. So as we begin to wind down, I've got a few more questions here. What are some of the top, maybe one or two emerging technologies that you're investigating that seems to have potential or has caught your attention?
Voice is really, really interesting. I was kind of an early adopter with the smart devices in the house. I've got all of the ones that are on the market right now, and we play with those a bit. There's still a long way to go in terms of how well voice can, as an interface, can work. Like I ask Alexa all the time various trivia questions or things, and it's not that good yet. Like it's great at playing music. It's probably pretty cool for ordering products. Like, hey, I need more toothpaste. Right. But in terms of answering a more complex query, it's still got some ways to go. And there's some really smart people talking about it and doing good work there. So I have confidence that it's going to get there. At one point, we'll all have a Jarvis in our house or in our watch or embedded in our ears or something. But we're still a ways to go on that. Okay. Another thing that I think is interesting, I'm not so interested in VR as much as I am in AR. I think that it's going to be a stretch for people to wear a device on their face all day, but having something embedded into their existing sunglass frames is probably likely. Okay. And even if it's just showing you things like, oh, here's a heads-up display for your navigation, or, oh, that restaurant that you wanted to go to is open. Anything that kind of helps you through your day-to-day tasks, I think, is helpful.
Okay. Fantastic. So what sort of books, blogs, podcasts, YouTube channels are you reading and watching that for insight and inspiration?
The books that I gravitate towards are really around psychology and human behavior and kind of trends and what's our understanding of how we make decisions. As far as podcasts go, I like the How We Built This podcast. I like a lot of the stuff from Gimlet Media that talks about startups. Anything that talks about entrepreneurial stuff. I tend to do a lot of ebooks or Audible.
Okay.
With Audible, I'm listening to a lot of biographies right now. Just finished Ted Turner's biography. I'm working on Richard Branson's biography right now.
Oh, wow. Okay.
I think it's interesting to go back and learn from people who have built businesses in other climates and take lessons from that for how to build a business in this climate. I believe fundamentally it's not that different. Like we're all just solving challenges for our customers. So how we go about that fundamentally hasn't changed. Technology is just the tool of the day.
Okay. All right. Cool. So if you could, who would you like to sit down with and have a conversation about customers, marketing, branding, behavior, and why so?
Customers, marketing, and branding.
Anybody out there that you'd like to, living or dead?
Yeah, the people at Pentagram, I think are doing great work. So I think a conversation with Michael Beirut might be interesting. Lee Clow comes to mind in that vein. I'm sure there's a lot of people that I don't know their names, but they're doing great work that could be really insightful. The top of my list for people to sit down with and talk to kind of in general would be like Ray Dalio. I think his insights into just how to build a business and build a culture of innovation and delivering on excellence would be good. Another guy who's kind of off the beaten path is a guy named Toto Wolff. He is the guy who runs the Mercedes-Benz Formula One team. They've done some amazing things over the past several years, and he's one of the people who helped spearhead that. And I think just from a operational efficiency, management, and understanding how to make teams work, I think he would be a really interesting person to talk to.
Oh, wow. It's quite more than I thought. Okay, that's fascinating. I'm going to check some of these people out. So as we really start to close up this segment here, is there like a nugget or two that you could leave with the audience when it comes to branding and marketing that they can utilize or focus on right away?
Yeah, the thing that I tell everybody is that a brand exists at the intersection of what you do and how people feel about it. And if you can take that to heart and you can remember that as you're making decisions about both how you're going to market yourself and what kind of products you're going to make in the first place, I think you'll be better off.
Okay. So I've heard a rumor that you have a podcast as well. Is that true?
I do, yeah. It's called Design Driven. You can find it at designdriven.biz.
Okay, fantastic. What's it about?
So we talk about how using design thinking and good product methodologies help build sustainable businesses. I talk to people from all over. They've had people on from Salesforce and LinkedIn and some people from government, people from startups, people from enterprise, talking about how a good design process leads to better product outcomes. One conversation that comes to mind, I was talking to Nate Whitson at LinkedIn, and he runs a lot of their design system teams. He was talking about how using good design process actually helps their employees feel better about their work and feel that they're getting more rewarding work done. So it's actually kind of a retention tool because people see progress and they feel good about it. So it's interesting to see all the different ways that using good design methodologies can benefit not just the product that you're selling, but how you make that product, and ultimately you build a business that's healthier as a result.
Fantastic. Well, Jay, thanks for being on this episode of the Marketing Made Great podcast. Now, if people want to learn more about you and your company, Nine Labs, could you share your contact information with us?
Yeah, sure. So easiest thing to do is go to 9labs.com, NINELABS.com. You can find us on Twitter and all the other social things with the handle 9labs. You can find me personally on Twitter. The handle is JC, just letter J, letter C. And if you want to email me, just send a note to hello@9labs.com.
Fantastic. Jay, again, thanks so much for being on this episode, and we'll talk soon.
Thanks for having me, Mark. It was a pleasure.
You bet. Take care now.
So we can brag on you here at the Marketing Made Great podcast. Now, the best part is that your story will not only encourage others, but could very well translate it into a win from you to a win for someone else. So email us today at team@csmediagroup.com about your success story, and we'll get back to you right away. Who knows? We may even ask you to record your story right here on the Marketing Made Great podcast to be an inspiration to others. So contact us today. We're looking forward to hearing your story right away. Thank you so much for listening to this week's episode of the Marketing Made Great podcast. If you want more details about today's show and the resources mentioned, go to www.csmediagroup.com/podcast. Please be sure to send us your comments about the show and follow the link in the show notes to give us your suggestions for future show topics. With your help, we'll continue to only get better. Now, you can contact us directly with your topics at podcasttopics@csmediagroup.com as well if you'd like. Be sure right now to stop everything and subscribe to the show in iTunes or on your favorite podcast source so you never miss an episode of the Marketing Made Great podcast. While you're there, write us a positive review if you like the show. Also, we're going to ask that you spread the word to your friends about this podcast by visiting us on Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn, and Instagram with all your comments. Now, when you're posting, be sure to use our hashtag #MarketingMadeGreat when posting so we can add to the discussion online and all the social media platforms. Now, our show is produced in our studios located in Atlanta, Georgia's premier business accelerator, Atlanta Tech Park. I'm your host, Mark Traeger, and I want to thank you so much again for taking the time to listen to this week's episode of the Marketing Made Great podcast.
Thanks for listening. We hope you enjoyed the show.